You'll hear from the victim's closest friend how the defendant gives that bottle of Cara wine to Genesis Petrillo on the day before the wedding. You'll hear how it's only after Genesis drinks from that bottle of wine that she becomes sick. It's only after she drinks from that bottle of Cara wine that she's rushed to the hospital. You'll hear from the ER doctor today just how severe Genesis' symptoms were. She can't breathe, her pupils are severely contracted, her pulse is slow. The doctor realizes that she's ingested something poisonous. He rushes to her care, but it is too late. Genesis Petrillo dies of pesticide poisoning on the morning of her wedding. Now, as the plaintiff, we have brought a claim of battery against the defendant, Harper Martini. That means we bear the burden of proof in today's case. We must prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not, that the defendant poisoned the bottle of Cara wine, that he did so with the intent to harm Genesis Petrillo, and that it was after Genesis drank that bottle of wine that she suffered harm. And members of the jury, that's exactly what we'll do today. Genesis Petrillo deserved to live a long and happy life alongside her soulmate. Instead, she was tragically taken away from us. Follow the pesticide from the defendant to the bottle to the victim. Thank you.
Defense, are you ready for your opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. Your Honor, members of the jury, my name is Alyssa Aguirre, and I, along with my colleagues, are here to represent the defendant, Harper Martini. All it takes is one too many. On the evening of June 7th, 2019, Mr. Martini joined his daughter, Casey Soto, and soon-to-be daughter-in-law, Genesis Petrillo, in the rehearsal for their wedding dinner. The night was full of champagne toasts, mingling, and more drinks among the wedding party. But unfortunately, that same night ended in unforeseen tragedy. Casey's fiance, Genesis Petrillo, was rushed to the hospital where she would later pass away on the morning of June 8th, 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, all it took was one too many. That is one too many drinks in Miss Petrillo's system that would ultimately lead to her death. So why are we here today? Well, we're here because the estate of Genesis Petrillo is alleging that not only that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning, and Harper Martini is to blame for it. The plaintiff will try to prove to you that Mr. Martini committed battery against Genesis, that she intentionally poisoned her with a bottle of wine mixed with pesticide. But ladies and gentlemen, the facts of the case today will show that Harper Martini is not capable of such action. Mr. Martini was not only a great father to Casey, but he would go out of his way just to show her how much he cared. Even today, Casey will describe this relationship and the active role that Harper Martini played in her life despite being a single parent. Regardless of the issues between Harper and Genesis, the evidence will show that Harper Martini would never go as far as causing harm to Genesis. You see, it's important to note that as the defense, we have nothing to prove to you today. In the state of Midlands, it is the plaintiff that bears the burden of proving every element of their claims of battery as true, that Harper Martini is liable by a preponderance of the evidence. First, they will have to show that Harper Martini committed an act against Genesis Petrillo. Second, they will have to prove that this act was intended to cause harm to Genesis Petrillo. And lastly, that this alleged act resulted in that harm to Genesis. However, you will realize from the evidence today that the plaintiff will fail to prove that Harper Martini took any action towards Genesis Petrillo, and this fact alone will prevent the plaintiff from meeting their burden. And to further prove this fact, you will hear testimony from 3 witnesses. First, Harper Martini will take the stand to express their care for their child and how they only wanted the best for Casey. He will then describe his work at Peony Estates and how much the business mattered to Harper Martini, as well as explain how he got into the business in the first place with the knowledge he's gained over the years. Lastly, Harper Martini will then teach the jury exactly how common it is to have pesticides and even other levels of contaminants in wine that is not organically grown. Next, Blair Osborne will help the jury see the great person Harper was. He will then describe that throughout their entire professional relationship, Mr. Martini was always diligent and kind. In fact, he will provide further detail about the relationship between Harper Martini and Casey Soto and just how much he wanted to support Casey. And then last, Dr. Cannon will provide expert testimony that will explain that there were other possibilities that could have caused the death of Genesis Petrillo, specifically alcohol poisoning. And in the closing, my co-counsel, Ms. Garcia, will speak to you one last time. She will discuss with you exactly how the plaintiff has failed to meet their burden and prove that it is more likely than not that Harper Martini took any action to harm Genesis Petrillo. And after the witness testimony, many things will still remain unclear, but one thing, and that one thing being that all it takes is one too many. It takes one too many drinks for the effects of alcohol poisoning to start taking control of the body, and that, members of the jury, more likely than not, was the case in the death of Genesis Petrillo. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence only points to one verdict, and that is to find Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
Plaintiffs, are you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez. Now, good evening, Ms. Rodriguez. Before I begin, can you see and hear me all right?
Yeah, I can.
All right, excellent. Now, could you go ahead and introduce yourself to the jury, please?
Well, good morning, everyone. Good evening. My name is Angel Rodriguez.
Now, what do you do for a living, Ms. Rodriguez?
Well, I work as a kindergarten teacher at Rapid River Valley Elementary School, but I have to be completely honest, I'm quitting next week. You see, in the last year, I've kind of realized that I can't really stand those critters and their grimy hands and the snot on the sleeve. I just can't do it anymore.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, how do you know Genesis and Casey?
Well, they were my best friends. I first met Casey and Genesis during a trivia night. I was just about to win when someone across the room sneezed. Do you know how far a sneeze travels? Maximum of 15 feet, and I was well within that range. Luckily, Casey walked right past me when it happened, and she took the hit, and from then on, we've been the best of friends.
Well, how are you related to today's case in particular?
Well, I was a part of the wedding party. I was there the day Genesis passed away.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about that wedding rehearsal and the night of. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened?
I mean, it was a real beautiful party. Toasts were made, food was served. Genesis and Casey were all dolled up.
What did you see between Genesis and the defendant on that night?
I saw fighting, and a lot more fighting. At one point, it got so bad that I witnessed Harper tell Genesis that she could make Genesis disappear.
Well, what happened after the defendant said she could make the victim disappear?
Well, after that, I saw Genesis walk up to Harper, but before she could get a word out, Harper grabbed her by the arm and yanked her into the hallway.
Well, hold on, Ms. Rodriguez. Did you speak to Genesis about the defendant yanking her into a hallway?
Well, yeah, I asked her about it, and her response was that she was afraid that Harper was going to kill her.
Was that the last time you saw the defendant before the rehearsal dinner?
No, a little before the rehearsal dinner, I saw him again.
Well, what was he doing?
He was making his way to the kitchen holding a big can of pesticide.
Well, did you ask the defendant what he was doing with that big can of pesticide?
Well, yeah, he said it was for Genesis, but I guess he was joking. It's just, it wasn't really that funny. After he just kind of walked away.
So after you saw the defendant head back into the kitchen holding that big can of pesticide, what went ahead and happened next?
Well, then that's when the rehearsal dinner started. Everyone was giving toasts, congratulating Casey and Jen. And then Harper stood up and made this big speech and then gave a special bottle of wine to Genesis.
Well, what was so special about that bottle of wine?
Well, Genesis was the only one I saw who received the Cara. Everyone else, including myself, was given a bottle of Horizon.
Well, so now that all these bottles of wine have been passed out and Genesis received that bottle of Cara, what went ahead and happened after that?
Well, Jen popped open her bottle of Cara and drank a couple of glasses. She even offered me a sip, which I was hesitant to take because of the germs, but I took a sip for Jen, and I immediately spit it out because it tasted very funny.
So how did the rest of that night end up going?
Well, Genesis and I stayed up drinking and talking about old times, and around 11 p.m. I noticed that Genesis seemed pretty out of it. I noticed that Genesis was passed out in her chair, so I decided to haul her up and take her back to her room.
So what happened after you got Genesis up to her room?
Well, Genesis started convulsing and vomiting, and she seemed to be getting worse, so I went ahead and called 911. And then EMTs came, and soon after, we rushed her to the hospital, and I went along with, and I waited in the hospital till about 8 a.m. I even slept in one of those filthy waiting room sofas. Oh, it was awful. When I woke up, I decided I had to let everyone know what had happened, so I made my way back to Peony Estates.
Well, who did you first talk to when you ended up coming back to Peony Estates?
The first person I talked to was Harper. I was about to tell him what had happened, but before I could say anything about Genesis, he just said, "Genesis got sick? Oh no, I guess there'll be no wedding." It really took me by surprise.
Well, why did the defendant, knowing about what had happened to Genesis, end up surprising you?
Well, I had no idea how Harper knew about Genesis being sick. I hadn't talked to anyone at the wedding or while I was waiting in the hospital, so as to how Harper had found out is beyond me.
Well, after you went ahead and talked to the defendant, what did you end up doing next?
Well, after she said that, I moved on to Casey's room where I told her what was happening, and we immediately rushed back to the hospital to check on Jen, but as soon as we got there, we were told that Genesis had passed.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. I now pass the witness, Your Honor.
Defense, are you ready for cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Good evening, Ms. Rodriguez. I'm very sorry for your loss and would like to thank you for being here. Now, I want to start by talking about Genesis and Casey. The three of y'all were pretty close, correct?
Yeah, we were the best of friends. They really supported me through my process of overcoming my germ fear.
And previously you mentioned y'all all met at a game of trivia, right?
Yeah, it was a real fun night. I was just about to win, and then someone sneezed. It was really awful.
Thank you. And at this bar y'all played trivia, there was some sort of alcohol consumption, correct?
Yeah.
Objection, Your Honor. As to character evidence, I believe opposing counsel is about to go on to establish that Genesis Petrillo was drinking quite heavily that night, this event occurring sometime in the past. They're truly trying to make an argument in conformity therewith that because Ms. Petrillo was drinking in the past, she drank on the night in question at the rehearsal dinner, and obviously this is inadmissible under Rule 404.
Defense response.
Yes, Your Honor. Rule 404 does not state that.
Can you go on? Like,
Yes,
are you about to enter character evidence as to the deceased's propensity for alcohol consumption?
Yes, Your Honor. This witness can testify to reputation.
Reputation for alcohol consumption?
Not in conformity, yes.
Your Honor, if I may.
You may.
Your Honor, they're clearly offering a character trait of alcoholism. Otherwise, there'd be no point to this line of questioning. They're truly trying to establish that because Ms. Petrillo drank in the past, she drank on the night in question. And as we heard in opening statements, they are trying to prove that Ms. Petrillo died from alcohol poisoning. They're clearly making an argument in conformity therewith, and this is inadmissible under Rule 404.
I'm going to allow the question for now. You can raise the objection later, but for now, I'm going to allow it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I believe she's okay. She's having some tech issues.
I'm sorry, what was that? Or is the defense attorney having technical issues?
I believe so, Your Honor, but I think she might be okay now.
Okay, are you ready to proceed with your questions?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you can proceed.
Well, to answer that objection, Your Honor, she can testify to this.
You already won the objection. I'm allowing your question. The witness can answer the question.
Yes, Your Honor. Moving forward, in fact, the activities that the three of you will do together typically involve consumption of alcohol.
I mean, we didn't always. We're not alcoholics. We tend to just limit it.
Now let's transition to Casey's father, Mr. Martini. You are familiar with him, correct?
Yeah, I hung out with Casey and Genesis a bunch, so I did see him once in a while.
And also, as a member of the wedding party, he was around regularly when planning.
Yeah, that's right.
Now moving to the night of the rehearsal dinner. You mentioned he made a toast for Genesis, correct?
Yeah.
And during this toast, he presented her with a bottle of Cara wine, correct?
Yeah, he presented her with a bottle of Cara wine, and everyone else, including myself, got a bottle of Horizon.
Your Honor, permission to display pre-admitted evidence marked 2A and 2B.
You may. Yep.
Ms. Rodriguez, do you recognize this bottle and label?
Yeah, I think that's the bottle that Jen got.
Did you see anybody else besides Genesis drink from this bottle?
No, I don't think so.
Not even yourself?
I did take a sip, but I spit it out. It tasted real awful. I couldn't handle it.
So you also had this wine?
Yeah, I didn't drink it. I spit it out.
But it did enter your body, correct?
I mean, I guess, yeah, my mouth.
Did you feel sick after?
I wouldn't say so. I spit it out, so I don't really.
Yes. So after having this wine, did that night include any more drinks?
Sorry, can you repeat your question real quick?
So after having this wine, did that night include any more drinks?
Yeah, I think there was a bar, so there were more drinks.
Ms. Rodriguez, I am so sorry for your loss and really want to thank you for being here. I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Linus.
No further questions, Your Honor. We just ask that Ms. Rodriguez be excused.
You may be excused. Are you ready to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff will be calling Sam Arnold to the stand. Mr. Arnold, I think that your microphone might be off. You might be muted, sir.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Sounds good.
All right, great.
Now, can you introduce yourself to the jury?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Sam Arnold. It's real nice to meet all of you.
Mr. Arnold, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a caterer here in Midlands. You know, I even used to own my own restaurant, but it was a little too French for the area. So back in 2015, I opened up Arnold's Eatery, with an A instead of an E. I love the alliteration. I think it's part of why I've been so successful.
Mr. Arnold, why are you here today in court?
So I was the caterer for Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto's wedding rehearsal, and I was supposed to cater the wedding as well. So I was involved with the planning process for all that kind of stuff.
How'd you end up getting the job to cater that wedding?
So it was, I think, back in 2016, I met Hopper Martini, and, my business had been struggling a little bit, but once I met him, we started having this real good working relationship and things started to turn a corner.
Oh, Mr. Arnold, do you know anybody else that was involved in the wedding planning process?
Let's see. I knew my employees. I also knew Blair Osborne, the wedding planner. We worked on a couple of things together before. Besides that, I of course met Genesis and Casey through the wedding planning process as well. Besides that, I didn't really know anyone.
So how much did you know about the victim, Genesis Petrillo?
Not a ton. All I really knew about Genesis was stuff that Hopper had told me. He was always going on about how Genesis was immature, selfish, that he wanted anyone but her to marry his daughter. From how Hopper talked about Genesis, it seemed they went together about as well as pillows and hand grenades, if you know what I mean.
Oh, Mr. Arnold, did their relationship ever seem to improve to you?
No. Every time I saw Hopper and Genesis talking, they were fighting.
I want to move on and talk about the day of the wedding rehearsal. Were you there at the wedding rehearsal?
Yeah, I was.
So how did that day start out for you?
Well, I showed up to the venue, Peony Estates, at around 11 a.m., and I made a beeline straight for the kitchen to make sure everything was getting ready all right.
Did you see anything while you were in the kitchen?
Yeah, actually, there was one thing that really jumped out at me. There was this canister of pesticide that Hopper had with her.
Mr. Arnold, what did the defendant say that he was doing with the can of pesticide in the kitchen?
He didn't say much about the pesticide, but he did say that he was finalizing wedding gifts for the wedding party. It was a bunch of wine bottles that were all the same except for one.
Mr. Arnold, can you tell us a little bit more about that one wine bottle that was different?
Yeah, it was a red blend. I think Hopper called it Kara. He said that it was made special for Genesis.
Now, would you recognize that wine bottle as well as the label if I was to show it to you?
Yeah, I think so.
Your Honor, permission to put up Exhibit 2A and 2B that have been previously admitted into evidence.
Question. And you don't have to ask going forward if it's already been admitted.
Yes, Your Honor.
Just make a mention of the record of what you're publishing.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Arnold, can you see that all right?
Yeah, I can.
So did the defendant tell you anything about that Kara wine bottle?
He said that he was hoping that it would solve all of his problems forever. Besides that, no.
Did the defendant ever explain what he had meant by that?
No, and I didn't ask. Hopper just told me that I was the one that was supposed to give the bottle to Genesis at the wedding rehearsal, and she wanted to make sure that I was the one to hand it to her. After that, I just kind of left it there and went back to planning.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. So how did the rest of the wedding rehearsal end up going?
It was pretty smooth, a little bit tacky for my taste, but, I gave out and my staff gave out the wine bottles as planned. Hopper said something while we were doing that to Genesis. I think he said to wait to drink the wine bottle until Genesis was alone. That was a little strange to me. Good wine is meant to be shared, and I share my fair share, but, not my wedding, wasn't paying for it. I held my tongue.
Now, Mr. Arnold, while you were there, did you see anyone else drink that bottle of wine?
No. I didn't, come to think of it.
So what ended up happening after the defendant gave the victim that special bottle of wine?
I didn't see much of what happened that night. I left pretty shortly after, but after the rehearsal, I showed up the next morning and I found out that Genesis had been rushed to the hospital and passed away. Of course, the wedding was canceled.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Defense,
May I proceed?
you may.
Mr. Arnold, you first met Mr. Martini in 2016, correct?
Yeah.
And Mr. Martini decided to have you cater for the 1-year anniversary party for Peony Estates.
Yep, that's right.
And Peony Estates is one of your largest clients.
They were, yeah.
But they do, or your business with Peony Estates makes up a significant source of your business's income.
But before all this happened, of course, yeah.
In fact, you would say that you owed, prior to this, a lot of your business, or a lot of your success in your business to Harper Martini and Peony Estates.
Yeah,
Honor, as to relevance, the bar for relevance says that the line of questioning has to make one matter of fact in this trial more likely than not. Going into whether or not Mr. Arnold makes money out of Peony Estates does not go into the fact of the defendant poisoning Genesis Petria with that pesticide in the bottle of wine. So at this point, I have to object to relevance.
May I respond, Your Honor? Yes. Your Honor, this goes to show any bias in favor of Sam Arnold, and bias is always relevant.
Plaintiff, response?
As further said, Your Honor, the line of questioning has to be able to show one matter of fact. A tendency to make a fact more or less likely is the standard. So going into the questioning with Mr. Arnold, whether or not how much money he makes from Peony Estates does not meet that standard of making a fact more or less likely in today's case.
I'm going to overrule your objection. I think any fact that shows bias or prejudice of the witness is going to be admissible.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'll repeat the question. Mr. Arnold, you would say that you would owe a lot of your success to Mr. Martini and Peony Estates.
Yeah.
And in the time that you've worked with Harper Martini, you've gotten to know him pretty well.
Yeah, I guess so. Sure.
And Harper Martini has always been nothing short of friendly to you.
I suppose so. We had a real good working relationship. We didn't really hang out or anything like that, but whenever I worked with him, he seemed fine. Yeah.
However, you did come to know Mr. Martini as someone that you wouldn't want to cross.
That's true. Yeah.
Especially when it came to the business of Peony Estates.
Yeah, definitely.
In fact, you believe that Harper Martini would do anything to protect Peony Estates.
Yeah, Harper, yeah.
And I'd like to direct your attention to November 2018. Now, Mr. Martini had asked you to cater for Casey Soto's wedding, correct?
Yeah, that's when he first asked me about it, yeah.
And you were quite thrilled about this offer.
Yeah, it's my passion.
And while planning this wedding, you were made aware of a potential wedding issue.
Yeah.
And this issue happened to be the tension between Mr. Martini and Genesis Petrio.
Yeah, I mean, they just didn't get along.
But you were confident that you would still make the wedding great despite this little tension, or this tension.
I mean, my role is to make sure that there's good food on all the plates, and, nothing brings people together like good food.
Now, in February of 2019, you held a tasting event for Casey Soto and Genesis Petrio's wedding at Peony Estates, correct?
Yeah, that was in February, yeah.
And at that tasting, Casey Soto kept asking you questions about living in France.
Yeah, I actually did all of my culinary training in France. They were asking me some questions about it, yeah.
And in May of 2019, in May of 2019, Genesis Petrio played you a voicemail that had been, in May of 2019, you were played a voicemail that had been left by Genesis Petrio.
Yeah, it was a voicemail that was left for Hopper. It was a bit harsh.
And in this voicemail, you found out that Genesis and Casey were planning to move to France.
Yeah, Hopper wasn't a fan of that. I'll tell you that much. It was lots of tension because of that one, yeah.
Now, I'd like to bring your attention to the night of the rehearsal dinner, June 7th, 2019.
Sure.
You were made aware of a bottle of wine called Cara, correct?
Yeah, like I mentioned, it was for Genesis, and I was the one that was supposed to hand it to her, yeah.
And speaking of this wine, Mr. Martini had told you that he had been working on and creating this particular blend of wine for the past several months.
He might have mentioned something like that. Yeah, don't remember too clearly, but I think so.
So is that a yes?
Yeah, I think he mentioned something about it being a red blend. Yeah.
And Mr. Martini then told you that this bottle was specifically to give to Genesis.
Yeah, he said some weird stuff about the bottle. You're right, yeah.
And you later presented Genesis with this wine bottle.
I did, yeah. It was my job to hand it out, like I said.
And around 10:15, you had packed up your stuff for the night and left the winery.
Yeah.
And not once throughout any of the interactions between Mr. Martini and Genesis Petrio did you ever feel like Genesis was in any danger.
I mean, not at the time. After hearing all this stuff again, looking back, I don't know what to think, but I figured it was just in-law drama before a wedding. But I don't know now.
So is that a no?
Well, at the time, obviously, I didn't think anything was wrong. If I had, I would have said something. But I mean, there's this whole thing going on, so I don't really know what to think anymore.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Plaintiff, redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. We just asked that Mr. Arnold could be dismissed.
Okay. The witness is excused.
All right, pleasure meeting you all. Have a nice night. All right, let's talk.
Good evening, Your Honor. At this time, we call Dr. Jim Kwan to the stand. Good evening, Dr. Kwan. Can you see me okay?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Now, could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Dr. Jim Kwan. It's nice to meet you all.
How are you related to today's case?
I was the emergency medical physician that treated Genesis Petrio on the morning of June 8th, 2019.
What are your qualifications to discuss today's case?
I received my bachelor's in biology from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Then I got my medical degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. After that, I completed my residency and a fellowship at the Emory Medical Center and specialized in toxicology. And now I'm the chief physician at River Valley Hospital right here in Midlands.
What do you do as the chief physician at River Valley Hospital?
I lead a team of nurses and doctors. We diagnose patients, determine what's causing their ailments, and then try to treat them. To put it more clearly, our job is to save lives.
Dr. Kwan, what method do you use when treating and diagnosing patients?
I use what's called the C method. My wife actually likes to joke that I'm the old man in the C. But anyway, it stands for Standard Emergency Admittance Method. Essentially, it just means that we observe symptoms, rule out possible causes, and then determine the best course of treatment.
Is this method reliable?
Absolutely, of course. It's what It's the gold standard in the field. It's what all emergency medical physicians do.
Was this the method you used to treat Genesis Petrillo on June 8th, 2019?
Yes, it was.
Did you have all the information you needed to treat Genesis on that day?
Yes, really, we just need the patient and maybe a few medical records.
Now, I actually want to talk about the night you met Genesis Petrillo. What happened?
Well, I received a page that night from an ambulance that was incoming with who I later learned was Genesis Petrillo. They reported some symptoms that made me think maybe she was suffering from alcohol poisoning. And whenever she entered the hospital, it was at that point that I began my analysis. I actually have a presentation that can maybe help the jury follow along with my analysis, if that's okay.
Of course, let the record reflect that the witness will be sharing his screen with the presentation he prepared for today's case.
Apologies.
Now, Dr. Kwan, walk us through this presentation. What first led you to believe that Genesis Petrillo was suffering from alcohol poisoning?
So whenever she entered the hospital, I noticed that she had to be wheeled in, indicating to me that she couldn't walk. She was vomiting everywhere, and it was a deep red color, and her speech was severely slurred.
Once you saw this, what did you do?
Well, at that point, I was suspicious that she may have been suffering from alcohol poisoning just based on that initial examination without any further evidence, because all of these symptoms are consistent with alcohol poisoning.
And after this initial examination, were you able to conclusively determine if it was alcohol poisoning?
Actually, no. Upon further examination, I was able to rule out alcohol poisoning as the cause of Ms. Petrillo's symptoms.
And can you tell us what specifically made you rule out alcohol poisoning?
Well, upon interviewing the patient and making further observations, she reported that she had stomach pain and that she was having trouble breathing. In addition, upon listening to her pulse, it was slowed, which is inconsistent with alcohol poisoning. Her pupils were severely contracted, her eyes were tearing excessively, and she showed signs of experiencing involuntary muscle spasms.
Upon seeing these symptoms, what did you do?
At that point, I was able to rule out alcohol poisoning, and I became suspicious that she may have injected something, or ingested something toxic.
Once you thought that she had ingested something toxic, did you proceed to do another examination?
Yes, actually, at that point, I ordered a poisons and toxins analysis in order to confirm my diagnosis.
What did that toxins analysis relate to you?
It indicated that Ms. Petrillo actually did have an organophosphate pesticide in her system and that it was flowing through her blood.
I'm sorry, Dr. Kwan. What's an organophosphate pesticide?
Sorry. Organophosphate pesticide is just a specific type of pesticide. You see, off at the store or go or whatever you see. It's just a specific type of pesticide that is a little bit more intense.
How can someone come into contact with this pesticide?
There are actually three major ways that somebody can come into contact with a pesticide like this. First is to breathe it in as it's sprayed out as an aerosol, but that would cause throat irritation, which I didn't see in Ms. Petrillo. Second is through skin contact. It can be absorbed through the pores and directly into the bloodstream via this form of contact, but that would cause a rash, which I also did not observe in Ms. Petrillo. The third way is that it can be mixed with a liquid, or it can contaminate a food item and be directly ingested. And because the other methods there was no evidence to indicate the other methods were occurring, I proceeded on the belief that Ms. Petrillo had ingested the pesticide directly.
So once you've made this realization, were these symptoms consistent with pesticide poisoning?
Yes, after all of this confirming evidence, it was clear to me that pesticide poisoning was causing the symptoms, as it checks off every single one.
Once you had this realization, what happened?
At that point, I realized that I needed to act quickly because her symptoms were reaching an advanced point. I administered the antidote for organophosphate pesticide poisoning at that point.
Did the antidote help?
Unfortunately, her symptoms had become too advanced and she fell into a coughing fit and began to seize. Later that morning, she passed away, and I had to declare her time of death as 9:27 a.m. on June 8th, 2019.
Now, Dr. Kwan, I just want to make it very clear for the jury, what do you believe caused Genesis Petrillo's death?
While I do believe that some of Ms. Petrillo's symptoms may have been slightly exacerbated by the alcohol in her system, all of the confirming and medical evidence that I observed in Ms. Petrillo, as well as the test results that I observed, indicated to me that this was death by pesticide poisoning that was ingested through wine.
Thank you. I pass the witness, Your Honor.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you were Ms. Petrillo's treating physician on June 8th.
Yes, I was.
And you mentioned that upon arrival to the hospital, you noticed that Ms. Petrillo was exhibiting a variety of symptoms.
Yes.
Ms. Petrillo smelled of wine.
She did.
She appeared to be intoxicated.
Yes, she seemed to be somewhat intoxicated, yes.
In fact, like you said, you believe this was, upon arrival, you thought that this was going to be an alcohol poisoning case, correct?
Yes, it's something that we see in the emergency room a fair amount, but then the symptoms that she exhibited were completely inconsistent.
So that's a yes to my question.
Yes.
You thought it was, thank you. You also noticed a few other symptoms that you thought were inconsistent with alcohol poisoning, correct?
I did.
But a good amount of those symptoms were consistent with alcohol poisoning.
Several of them were, but many of her symptoms were actually directly contradictory to alcohol poisoning.
Yes. Now, after Ms. Petrillo was admitted to the hospital, you completed a complete examination of Ms. Petrillo.
Yes, as I do with all of my patients.
You took a sample of Ms. Petrillo's vomit.
I did.
Which you noticed was completely red in color.
It was a deep red wine color, yes.
And it actually smelled somewhat acidic, correct?
Yes.
Now, after you noticed those other symptoms, you concluded that this was an organophosphate poisoning case, correct?
I did.
And it was because of the symptoms that she was exhibiting.
Yes, as well as the presence of pesticide in her system.
But the test results that you ordered also showed that she had a blood alcohol level of 0.16, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware that a person's blood alcohol content is not something that stays consistent throughout the night, correct?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
It changes depending on how many drinks a person's consumed, correct?
Yes.
And the types of drinks that they've consumed.
Yes.
Now, personally, you're unaware of an instance where death has happened to a person with a BAC of lower than 0.22.
That's correct.
But that doesn't mean that it's impossible.
I don't see how anybody could have that negative of a reaction to alcohol with that low of a blood alcohol concentration, but I can't say that it's 100% impossible.
So there is a possibility regardless of how small.
I would say that the probability is negligible from a statistical and medical perspective, but it's technically not impossible.
So that's a yes to my question.
Yes, with a caveat.
And you have no way of knowing what Ms. Petrillo's peak BAC was that night, correct?
Yes. Well, no, excuse me. Sorry, I misinterpreted your question. No, I can't say to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty what the peak BAC was, but given that her BAC returned back to 0.16, I know that it didn't really reach a deadly level.
Well, but you don't know what that peak BAC was, right?
I don't know specifically, but I know that it didn't reach a deadly level because it was able to return back down to 0.16.
And Doctor, you're on the board of directors for Organic Solutions, correct?
Yes, I am.
And that's an organization that advocates against the use of chemical pesticides, correct?
Yes.
And you're actually hopeful that this case is going to help convince legislators to go ahead and outright ban the use of chemical pesticides.
Well, that would be a nice bonus, but I'm just testifying about the treatment of Genesis Petrillo.
Well, doctor, I'm not asking you why you're testifying, but
Okay.
You're hopeful that this case will help with that, correct?
Yes, I think this case proves how dangerous organophosphate pesticides are to the human body.
And you ultimately determined that Ms. Petrillo's cause of death was due to respiratory failure as a result of pesticide poisoning, correct?
Yes, caused by bronchospasms, which were caused by low acetylcholinesterase, which was caused by pesticide, but yes.
And you actually made this determination before you received any of the test results that you had ordered, correct?
Yes, because all of the symptoms were consistent with organophosphate pesticide poisoning, and then the test results confirmed that there was pesticide in Ms. Petrillo's system.
So that's a yes to my question, that you made it before receiving any of those results, correct?
I had received some test results at that point, but not the test result that indicated organophosphate pesticide in the blood. No.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Dr. Kwan is allowed to step out.
Yeah, the witness is excused.
Actually, Your Honor, with that, we rest her case in chief and we just ask for a brief 5-minute recess.
5 minutes, and then the defense can start their case in chief.
Yes. Now, may I ask, I don't know who the host is, but may I ask for us to be put into breakout rooms?
I don't actually know how to do that.
No, that's understandable, Your Honor. No problem.
I show that 5 minutes is up. Is the defense ready to proceed with their case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you may call your first witness.
The defense calls Harper Martini. Good evening. Please state your name for the record.
Yeah, my name is Harper Martini. Kind of like the cocktail. I think it's kind of ironic for today's trial, if you ask me.
And why are you here today, Mr. Martini?
Well, I'm being accused of doing something kind of ridiculous, which is poisoning one of my own wines and then passing that off to my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, which is essentially putting my own daughter at risk.
So what exactly is your relationship to the victim?
Well, my daughter Casey, my son Casey was actually engaged to Genesis, so I was basically their soon-to-be father-in-law.
And besides Casey, any other close family?
No, not really. It's always just been me and Casey pretty much.
And how would you describe your relationship with Casey?
Well, Casey's the light of my life. I mean, we've always been pretty close. Casey even worked with me at the winery. They did a lot. They came up with names for the wines, workshops, did some stuff for the website, and they've always been a big help. So we've always just been close.
When first hearing the news about Casey and Janice's engagement, were you happy for them?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because obviously I want my own child to be happy, but also no, because I knew Genesis was going to be difficult to work with in the wedding planning process. And I don't know, I just didn't think Genesis was good enough for Casey.
Objection,
And
Your
why
Honor,
is that?
to speculation on that Genesis would be difficult to work with regarding the wedding planning process. This witness is delving directly into the mindset of Genesis Petrillo in that statement and is inadmissible in today's court.
Response.
Your Honor, that is his opinion.
Your
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Your Honor, stricken from the record.
Yes. Defense, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. So why is that you thought Genesis wasn't good enough for Casey?
Well, Genesis was a troublemaker and was a bad influence for Casey. I actually recall this one time where Genesis made this stupid bet with Casey about drinking, and Casey actually ended up in the hospital with alcohol poisoning.
Now let's transition to your line of work. What exactly is it that you do?
Well, I'm the owner of a winery here in Peony Estates here in Midlands.
How did you get into the winemaking business?
Well, I went to UCLA and double majored in horticulture and business and graduated back in 1990. From that point on, I settled down here in Midlands and began working at this place called Cumberland Farms, another winery. From there, I went and worked at this other winery called Rosie and Pedro until I finally got the ambition and opened up my own winery, Peony Estates.
So how long have you been in this industry?
I'd say about 20 years.
Now, in these past 20 years, would you say you've become very aware of what ingredients and chemicals go into wine?
I mean, yes, it's not exactly my first rodeo.
Your Honor, at this time, we'll be sharing pre-admitted evidence marked Exhibit 9.
Okay, proceed.
Mr. Martini, what is this that I'm showing you?
That's a lab test that was conducted on one of my wine casks back in 2018. I believe if you note, there's some isofenfo. It's basically another word for pesticides. I'm not too sure. Isofenfos, I believe.
Could this be an explanation as to why Genesis had pesticides in her system?
Well, we aren't an organic winery, so we use chemical pesticides. So with any wine, there's going to be some pesticides within it. It's totally safe and totally normal. Any winery owner will tell you that.
Now moving on. The night of the rehearsal dinner, did you make a toast to Genesis?
Yes, I also presented her with this beautiful blend of a Cara wine.
Your Honor, at this time, we display already pre-admitted evidence exhibit 2A and 2B.
Proceed.
Mr. Martini, is this the bottle and label you gave to Genesis?
Yes, it is. Like I said, it's a very elegant blend of my Cara wine that I hadn't even released to the public. Casey's actually the one that came up with the name for it.
Now, why would you give such a fancy wine that hasn't even been released yet to your soon-to-be daughter-in-law?
Well, Casey had spoken to me and they wanted me to try to make amends with Genesis. So I decided that I would try to make peace with Genesis. I knew she enjoyed her alcohol, so I provided her a very nice and unique wine that I was sure was going to smooth things over.
Objection, Your Honor, as to character evidence. Once again, Mr. Martini going into whether or not Genesis Petrillo liked alcohol is clearly offering an argument in conformity therewith that because she liked alcohol at one point in her life, she drank heavily on the night in question, and as a result, this is inadmissible in today's court under Rule 404.
Okay, I'm going to overrule that objection. I think we've already heard evidence from one of your witnesses that she was drinking that night.
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, you may proceed.
Mr. Martini, did you poison Genesis Petrillo?
No, of course not. I mean, come on, think about it logically, right? We're sitting there at the rehearsal dinner, and I have this bottle of pesticides that I supposedly poisoned. And I go and I give it to Genesis. And I just hope, and I hope, and I hope, and I hope that she decides not to share that with my own child, Casey. Because if for some reason, as young couples would do and share some drinks, my Casey would have also died. So no, doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you. I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Martini, you love Casey more than anything, right?
Of course.
You do anything for your daughter.
Yeah, of course.
And you wanted what was best for her, right?
As any parent would, yes.
But just to be clear, Mr. Martini, you didn't think Genesis was what was best for Casey, did you?
No, Genesis was a bad influence on my child, and I didn't want that to be something that affected Casey.
In fact, you hated Miss Petrillo, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, she put my daughter in the hospital, so yeah.
But to be clear, you saw her as a threat to your very business.
Well, and I guess you could say so, maybe.
That's a yes to my question. You saw her as a threat to your business, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In fact, you even tried to talk Casey out of marrying Genesis in the first place, right?
Yes.
And now, Mr. Martini, you remember receiving a phone call from Genesis on about May 12th, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And during that phone call, Genesis told you that her and Casey, well, they were moving to France.
Yeah, she sounded so angry.
She told you that you'd never meet your grandchildren.
Yeah, it was such an awful thing to say to me.
And after hearing all this, you wanted nothing more than to stop that wedding.
Of course.
Now, sometime after that phone call, you eventually wrote a note for Genesis, didn't you?
I did, yes.
You recognize that note if I showed it to you here today in court?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm sharing Exhibit 24 on my screen.
Proceed.
Apologies, Your Honor, text a little slow. And there we go. Now you can see this correctly, right, Mr. Martini?
Yes, I can.
This is your handwriting, right?
Yes, it is.
You wrote this document.
I did, yes.
You believe everything within it to be true, right?
Yes.
This is a true and correct copy of that document, right?
Yes.
Nothing's been changed or altered with it since you last saw it, right?
No.
Objection.
Your Honor,
State your objection.
Objection to proper character evidence.
I'm going to overrule your objection. Proceed.
Your Honor, at this time, plaintiff offers Exhibit 24 into evidence.
That's any response?
No, Your Honor.
Then Exhibit 24 is admitted.
All right, now, Mr. Martini, in this note, you tell Genesis Petrillo this wedding, it can't happen.
Correct, yes.
You say that you need her completely out of your life.
It's what was best for Casey.
You offer her $300,000 just to leave Casey.
I was trying to test her to see what kind of person she was, and then she took the money and didn't even leave Casey at that point. So that was proof to me enough of what kind of person Genesis was.
Well, Mr. Martini, I'm not asking you about proof of what kind of person Genesis was. I'm asking if you offered $300,000 to her to leave Casey. And you did, right?
Yes, I did, and she took it.
And you say right here, if she doesn't leave, will you threaten to take her out of the picture the hard way?
Yes, I do. It was just a terrible thing to write. I regret saying it like that. I was just trying to test her.
Well, Mr. Martini, I now want to move on to the wedding rehearsal. I'm now stopping the sharing of Exhibit 24. Now, before that wedding rehearsal dinner even began, you were angry at Genesis.
She arrived 15 minutes late to her own wedding rehearsal.
Exactly. When she arrived late, you went right over to confront her, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You told her all about how much this day meant to your daughter.
Of course.
And she responded by laughing directly in your face.
Yeah, she did.
Mr. Martini, to be clear, at that moment, you wanted nothing more than for Genesis to be gone.
Yeah.
And after she laughed in your face, you went right down to that wine cellar, correct?
I did, yes.
You picked up that 2019 bottle of Cara wine that you were talking about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and you handed it over to Genesis Petrillo.
Not right then, but I brought it up for later use, later in the night.
Now, Mr. Martini, you know quite a bit about wine, right?
Of course, yeah.
And as a wine owner, you know quite a bit about pesticide, don't you?
Yes, I'd say so.
You're aware that it's virtually impossible to tell when pesticide has been mixed into wine, right?
Yes.
Mr. Martini, you'd agree with me. Drinking wine with pesticide, well, it can cause some harm.
I believe so, yes.
It can even be fatal.
Probably, yes.
And just to be clear, you knew all of this information when that wine bottle of Cara reached Genesis Petrillo, right?
Yes.
Now, to be clear, Mr. Martini, only Genesis received a bottle of Cara wine, correct?
Yes, everyone else received a bottle of a Horizon 2017 wine.
Exactly. And on that day alone, the only person you saw drink that wine was Genesis Petrillo.
Yes.
And just to be clear, Mr. Martini, Genesis Petrillo died the next day after drinking that bottle of wine.
She did. I don't know if it was because of the wine, but she did die the next day, yes.
I now pass the witness, Your Honor.
Defense, your witness.
No, there you direct, Your Honor. At this time, we just ask that Mr. Martini be excused.
The witness is excused. Defense may call their next witness.
Sorry, Your Honor, I was facing technical issues, but the defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand. Sorry, my computer is freezing. Okay, there we go. Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes, hello, I'm Blair Osborne.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Osborne?
Well, not only am I the greatest event planner in Rapid River Valley, but I'm the founder and owner of Bliss by Blair Events, my own company.
And how many years have you owned Bliss by Blair Events?
I've owned and operated since 2011, I believe.
Could you describe the types of events your company typically plans?
Well, at Bliss by Blair, we can basically do anything you want us to do, but if you really want the Blair Osborne experience, you're going to have us plan a wedding.
Now, I'd like to focus on the reason why you're here today. Mr. Osborne, how are you connected to this case?
Well, Harper actually hired me to plan the wedding for Genesis and Casey, and not to mention I was at Peony Estates the night that Genesis became sick.
Now, focusing on the history with Harper Martini and Peony Estates, how did Bliss by Blair Events come to work with the winery?
Well, back in 2015, I was still a rookie event planner. So as a rookie, I made an accidental double booking of a birthday party and a wedding, but thank God to Harper and Peony Estates that they offered me their venue to use.
Mr. Osborne, have you worked with Harper Martini and Peony Estates since 2015?
Oh yeah, of course. Between 2015 and 2019, we've done 83 events.
How would you describe your experience while working with them?
I've got nothing but good things to say about them. Not only were they professional with me, but they were diligent with the clients and the guests.
And in regards to the death of Genesis Petrillo, were you concerned about the reputation of your business?
I wouldn't really say concerned about my reputation. I'd never really risked my own professional reputation by repeatedly bringing clients and guests to a venue that I can't trust.
Did you have to take any precautions to protect your business after hearing about Genesis's death?
Oh yeah, I definitely released a public statement across the Bliss by Blair event social media accounts. I was just basically addressing the issue.
And if I showed you the statement today, would you be able to recognize it?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm now going to display pre-marked Exhibit 22.
Proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Osborne, can you see this?
Yes.
Could you describe what you see on the screen without going into its contents?
I see
Objection, Your Honor. At this time, I'm objecting to relevance. Mr. Osborne already explained that he gave a public announcement withdrawing from participating from any events at the venue. At this time, I don't see how it is relevant to show this post in today's case. It makes nothing more or less likely to have occurred in today's case.
May I respond, Your Honor?
May.
Your Honor, the bar for relevance is very low, and with this particular document, it goes to negate any notion of bias in favor of the defendant, and bias is always relevant.
Response from the press.
Yes, Your Honor. I believe this occurred after the fact. At this time, the act had already occurred. This makes no fact in the case more or less likely. So I don't see the relevance in today's case. We're slowly focusing on the acts taken by Harper Martini, and this has no effect in that.
At this point, bias against this witness hasn't been raised. I'm going to sustain the objection at this time. If on cross-examination, bias is raised in favor of the defendant, you can go on, we'll reevaluate whether we can go into this area at that time. Sorry.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
It's striked. It is stricken.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Osborne, I'd like to direct your attention to the date of the rehearsal dinner on June 7th, 2019. Can you tell me about the interactions between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo that afternoon?
Yes. Well, the two of them were doing their usual arguing, and for some reason, Casey wanted me to mitigate their arguing.
And did this bickering continue until the evening?
For sure.
And did anything else happen between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo that evening?
Yeah, it was later on in dessert. Although they were arguing earlier, he felt like smoothing things over. So he brought out this special bottle of wine for Genesis.
And after receiving this bottle of wine from Mr. Martini, did Genesis open it?
Oh yeah, I for sure saw her pop it open and start pouring drinks of it, started drinking from it, all that.
And Mr. Osborne, what other alcohol was available to the wedding party at this dinner?
Well, along with that bottle of wine, the wedding party had gotten a bottle of something as well as a gift. And we also had an open bar and we had a cocktail station going.
And when was the last time that you saw Genesis Petrillo at the rehearsal dinner?
It was around midnight. I saw her talking by the cocktail station with Drew and Angel. Most of the guests at that point had already gone to bed though.
Would you be able to estimate how much alcohol Genesis Petrillo consumed over the course of that night?
No, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how much Genesis had to drink that night, but I can say that her and Angel would have kept me there for the rest of the night if I let them.
And did their alcohol consumption worry you that night?
No, I wasn't really worried about them. I just wanted to make sure that they drink some water before bed because as an event planner, I've seen hungover clients and it's not a pretty sight.
And after the rehearsal dinner, what time did you return to Peony Estates on the following morning, June 8th, 2019?
It was about 6:30 in the morning. I showed up at Peony. I started setting up for the wedding, all that stuff.
And after you began setting up for the wedding, what did you do next?
About an hour later, it was around 7:15ish. I met with Harper and we both started waking up the wedding party.
And when you went to go wake up the wedding party, did Genesis Petrillo answer?
No.
What about Angel Rodriguez?
Angel didn't either.
And did you try to contact the two of them?
Yeah, I called and texted the both of them numerous times over the next hour, but I got no response from either of them.
And when was the next time you saw Genesis Petrillo again that day?
I didn't see Genesis at all.
And what happened after you hadn't seen Genesis that day?
Well, I think it was about, I can't really say when, I can't remember, but I remember, it was 8:30 a.m. Angel came in and informed us that Genesis had fallen into a coma.
And lastly, do you think that Harper Martini would have poisoned Genesis?
I've worked with Harper for 5 years. That's just not something I think Harper would do.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Apologize for that. Now, Mr. Osborne, you've worked extensively with Peony Estates.
Yes.
You planned over 80 events at their venue.
Yes, 83 to be exact.
You relied quite heavily on their venue, isn't that correct?
Yeah, it was a nice venue. I liked it.
And prior to working with Peony Estates, you were struggling.
I guess you could say that.
Well, Peony Estates actually saved you from a double booking catastrophe, isn't that correct?
Yeah, I was a rookie.
Well, you'd say that Peony Estates rescued you.
Yeah, in that situation, they definitely rescued me.
You would have lost business that day.
Probably not lose business, but I mean, I would have maybe had some ticked off clients. It was more so to do with the fact that a birthday reception just wouldn't finish up on time.
Nevertheless, Mr. Osborne, on that particular day, Peony Estates saved you.
Yeah.
And after that, you booked all your events with them.
Yeah, because I realized, well, they got a nice venue. Might as well head over there.
And now you're testifying for the defendant, Harper Martini, the owner of Peony Estates. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now I want to talk about the months leading up to the wedding. A little less than a month before the wedding, you actually met up with Harper and Casey.
Yes, I met with both of them. I think it was to discuss decor options, something along that lines.
Right, you met up with them to discuss some decorations.
Yes.
That's when the defendant showed a message to Casey.
Yes, Harper played this, it was some message out loud.
The message was from Genesis to Harper Martini, the defendant. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
It was a terrible message.
Oh, it was. Oh.
Now, after the defendant played that message, the defendant said something. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
She said, one of these days, Genesis is going to drink the wrong thing and it's going to kill her.
Something along that lines was definitely
Objection,
said.
Your Honor. Objection, Your Honor. Improper character evidence.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor, we're not offering any character or character trait. We're simply saying something that the defendant said months before the wedding.
May I respond, Your Honor?
I'm sorry.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may respond.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Your Honor. This particular question goes to show action and conformity there with the particular instances or the particular testimony brought up in this question. Response.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You don't need to. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Osborne, that's when you heard the defendant say, Genesis is going to drink something one day and it is going to kill her. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Now, at the dinner rehearsal, the defendant actually gave a bottle of wine to Genesis Pedrillo.
Oh yeah, it was this beautiful bottle of wine.
After the defendant handed it to her, she said, think about all that you have done. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Osborne, no evidence could convince you that the defendant didn't kill Genesis Pedrillo. Isn't that correct?
I wouldn't say that.
Is it your testimony today that there is evidence that could convince you that the defendant didn't kill Genesis Pedrillo?
Well, it's not evidence. I mean, I know Harper personally.
Mr. Osborne, no evidence could convince you that the defendant killed Genesis Pedrillo. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Even if evidence came out that the defendant poisoned the bottle of wine, that wouldn't convince you.
I guess you could say that.
Nothing could.
If you say so.
Thank you. Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Defense?
No further questions. I just ask that my witness be excused.
Your witness may be excused.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Cannon to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes, my name is Dr. Rosa Kangan.
And can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Yeah, I can. So I have an undergrad from Ohio State University. My emphasis is in chemistry in that part. From there, I went to Harvard Medical School, where I got a medical degree, and I emphasized in toxicology.
And what did you do after you graduated?
So after I graduated, I really wanted to move to the big city. So I ended up working at Massachusetts General Hospital for a couple of years. And then I got really tired of that and eventually moved to the country, Midlands, and became a professor. I was there in the Department of Chemistry as a professor in toxicology. And now I'm working at a consulting job.
What do you do at your consulting job?
Well, I work at gardening consulting, and I usually do a lot of different things. I do a lot of data collection and analysis for people who usually want to hire me, especially with my background in toxicology. And I work with really great people there.
What kinds of people do you work with?
Some of our biggest clients are like pesticide people. One of the biggest ones is dusky roach and rodent killer.
What's your relationship with Detsky like?
It's really good, but in today's case, he did mention that he does not want a pesticide to be involved.
And did that comment have any effects on your testimony or your conclusions?
Oh, of course not. I'm totally finding I'm finding all the facts in this case to be solely on my findings, and I'm completely being objective.
Are you being paid for your services?
I am. I'm getting paid a flat fee of $50,000, but that's typically what I get paid for.
Did you receive any documents pertaining to today's case?
Yes, I received a few exhibits and as well as Angel Rodriguez's affidavit and especially Dr. Kwan's report.
How did you review these documents?
I reviewed these documents by looking them over, doing an extensive research on them, and just finding the best things I can take from them to make my conclusion.
Are these types of documents commonly reviewed in your line of work?
Yes, these are typically common.
And what sorts of principles and methods did you use while reviewing today's case?
For reviewing today's case, I made sure to go through everything multiple times and conduct a research appropriate to get to the most accurate conclusion possible.
Are these principles and methods widely accepted in your field?
Yes, they are.
Did you reliably apply them?
Yes.
And did you prepare a report based on these documents?
I have.
Do you believe your testimony will help the jury understand the facts of today's case?
It will.
And after you completed your report, did you arrive at a conclusion?
I did. So I arrived at the conclusion that I completely agree with Dr. Kwan's findings in the fact that the mechanism of death is correct, but I do not agree with him on the cause of death of Genesis Petrillo.
You mentioned the cause and the mechanism of death. Can you explain what those are?
Yes, for sure. So the mechanism of death in this case, for example, it would be the physiological derangement that resulted in death, like the respiratory failure. But the cause of death is completely different. It's the specific injury or disease. So in this case, it's going to be the pesticide, the organophosphate.
Now, you mentioned an organophosphate. For those of us who don't know, can you explain what that is?
So organophosphate is what we find in pesticides that we used to usually kill bugs, and they're completely harmful to humans, and they shouldn't be, taken or used in that matter.
And you mentioned that you disagreed with Dr. Kwan's findings. Why is that?
Well, I disagree because when I was reviewing, I felt like there was a lot of conclusions that he didn't want to bring up. There's a lot of flaws in that. I came up with several other conclusions that could be the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death.
What were the conclusions that you came to?
So I came up with 4. The first one obviously is the organophosphate poisoning. The second one is hepatic disease, which is for the average person, chronic liver disease. The third is something that they could have ingested that night earlier that could have had a bad reaction. And then the fourth is as alcohol poisoning.
I'd like to actually focus on that last conclusion you just talked about. Why is it that you can't rule out alcohol poisoning?
I can't rule out alcohol poisoning because, as we know from Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, they were drinking a couple drinks that night, which we don't know how much they were drinking. We don't know the content of the average alcohol they were doing. They could have been doing shots. They could have been doing wine. Nobody was really keeping an eye on Genesis that night. But I do know that the BAC of that evening was 0.16 when they arrived at the hospital.
For those of us who don't know, can you explain what a BAC is?
Yes, I can. So a BAC is the blood alcohol content, and this refers to a percent of alcohol in a person's bloodstream. And then a BAC can determine how intoxicated a person can be and how impaired they could be as well.
Have you ever dealt with any alcohol poisoning cases in the past, doctor?
I have. So being from Boston, I've seen a lot of intoxicated people come to my ER, but I've never really seen anything connected to fatality under 0.30.
And while you were reviewing this case, do you remember referring to an alcohol impairment chart?
Yes, I did.
Would you be able to recognize that chart if I were to show it to you today?
I would.
Your Honor, I will be displaying Exhibit 23 on the screen now.
See.
Now, Dr. Cannon, what is it that you're seeing on the screen?
So I'm seeing the blood alcohol impairment chart, yes.
Are you familiar with this exhibit?
Yes.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
And do you believe it'll be helpful in supporting your testimony here today?
It would.
At this time, Your Honor, I move to enter Exhibit 23 into evidence.
Any response?
No objections, Your Honor.
Admitted.
Now, doctor, earlier you mentioned that Ms. Petrillo had a BAC of 0.16. Why is that important?
This is very important because we do know the BAC when entering the hospital, but we have no peak BAC, as we were not taking Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content earlier that evening. So there is no scientific certainty of that peak. So we could not known if Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content could have been higher than 0.16. It could have been 0.30 for all we know.
Can you recall what symptoms Ms. Petrillo was exhibiting at the hospital that day?
Yes, so we see that she was exhibiting, inability to walk, vomiting, which is corresponding to the portions on the thing, as well as inability to stand or walk, like it was pointed out there. She couldn't even stand up and she had to use a wheelchair. Vomiting, which has to do with severe impairment, as well as life-threatening portion, which is the unconsciousness. And as we can see, she was also exhibiting symptoms of the last portion, which was the respiratory paralysis.
Now, why are those symptoms important?
This is important because, as we see, they do coordinate with alcohol poisoning symptoms. So the option of taking alcohol poisoning completely off the table is not there. There's no scientific certainty that she was not experiencing alcohol poisoning that led to her untimely death.
Now, doctor, in your opinion, what do you think that this could have meant for Ms. Petrillo?
Well, this could have meant that the respiratory paralysis could have been a cause of her untimely death, since nobody was really watching how much alcohol she was taking. And as we know, her alcohol level was already at 0.16 when she got to the hospital, but no one knows the peak that evening.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Hi there, Dr. Cannon. I just want to speak about some stuff you just mentioned on direct, if that's all right.
Yes, that's fine.
Specifically, I want to talk about alcohol intoxication. That was one of your theories that you thought could have happened to Genesis Petrillo. Is that correct?
Yes, that's one of my theories.
And you reviewed all of the tests that Dr. Kwan ran.
I did.
So you know that Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content was 0.16%. Is that correct?
Yes, at that time at the hospital, but we do not know the peak.
Now, Dr. Cannon, in all your years, you've never seen an alcohol poisoning fatality connected with a blood alcohol content lower than 0.30%. That's significantly higher than 0.016%. Isn't that correct?
Objection?
Sorry, I heard an objection. What was that?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to object to compound. She's asking more than one thing.
Can you restate or rephrase your question?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Cannon, in all your years of working in the medical field, you specifically have never seen a fatality lower than 0.30%.
Personally, I haven't, but I'm only one person, so there could have been many, but no.
Now, Dr. Cannon, we can both agree that 0.30% is significantly higher than 0.16%.
I can agree with you on that point, yes.
In fact, in your report, Dr. Cannon, you explicitly state there's no evidence or scientific basis that would support a conclusion that Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content was at least 0.30%. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, but nobody was taking her blood alcohol content earlier that evening, so it could have been 0.30 for all we know.
Now, Dr. Cannon, let's talk about what this theory fails to explain. Alcohol poisoning wouldn't explain the organophosphate pesticides that were found in Genesis Petrillo. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
It doesn't explain the fact that Dr. Kwan noted that Genesis Petrillo had contracted pupils.
Yes, but yes.
It's actually the contrary with people who have alcohol poisonings. Their pupils are dilated, not contracted.
Sure.
Now, Dr. Cannon, it also wouldn't explain the fact that Genesis Petrillo had abnormally low levels of alpha-like tricrons.
Phenylchloresterase? Yes.
Yes, that's correct. Sorry about that. Isn't that correct, Dr. Cannon?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, Dr. Cannon, there's one theory that would explain all of Genesis Petrillo's symptoms. And that theory would be the fact that she ingested organophosphates or pesticides.
That is a good theory, but we're not ruling out alcohol poisoning or the other possibilities because it's not 100%.
Dr. Cannon, it's true that the Cara 2019 wine bottle that Genesis Petrillo drank from at the rehearsal dinner tested positive for organophosphate pesticides.
Yes, that's true.
And drinking wine with organophosphate pesticides would explain Genesis Petrillo's nausea.
Well, the nausea could also be a symptom from alcohol poisoning.
Dr. Cannon, I'm not asking about alcohol poisoning. I'm asking about pesticide poisoning. And pesticide poisoning could cause nausea. Is that correct?
It could, yes.
It could also cause bronchiospasms.
Yes.
It would also cause Genesis Petrillo to have contracted pupils.
Yes.
It would also qualify that Genesis Petrillo had a slow pulse.
Yes.
Now, just to be clear, Dr. Cannon, you actually believed that respiratory arrest is likely the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death.
Yes, I did agree on that with Dr. Kwan.
Now, that's not the only thing you agreed on. You agreed that organophosphate pesticides was the most likely cause of Genesis Petrillo's respiratory arrest.
Yes, most likely, but not 100%.
And you would also agree with me that the wine produced by the defendant Harper Martini is the most likely cause of organophosphate pesticide poisoning in Genesis Petrillo.
Once again, most likely, but it's not 100%.
Is that a yes to my question, Dr. Cannon?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Cannon, I want to talk about why you're so hesitant to accept Dr. Kwan's theory. Dr. Cannon, you were hired by the defense counsel today.
Yes, I was.
In fact, the defense counsel is paying you $50,000 to stand today and testify.
Yes, but I get paid $50,000 for most of my cases. It's not like I'm getting paid more for being here.
Furthermore, Dr. Cannon, you actually currently work and consult for a company called Gardner's Consulting, like you talked about on Direct.
Yes.
And one of your biggest clients for your company are chemical pesticide companies.
Yeah, that is true, but I'm finding all the findings I found today are completely objective.
Lastly, Dr. Cannon, it's true that the CEO of that chemical pesticide company that you work for told you that it was important that pesticides cannot be found to be responsible for Genesis Petrillo's death today. Isn't that
hearsay?
A response, Your Honor?
Yeah.
These statements were already elicited in direct examination, so they've already been entered into the evidence and have been stated onto the record.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Dr. Cannon, just to make it clear for the jury, the CEO of that pesticide company that you work for told you specifically that it was important that pesticides are not found responsible for the death of Genesis Petrillo in today's case.
So, like you were saying, the CEO, Eli Harrison, he's a really good friend of mine. He did mention that, but he would understand that I am completely being objective, and this is obviously in court. So I'm going to find everything in my research, even if it's not corresponding to whatever he said.
Dr. Cannon, is that a yes to my question?
Yes.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. At this time, may this witness be excused?
The witness is excused.
Thank you.
At this time, Your Honor, the defense also rests its case in chief.
Okay, in that case, we're going to take a 5-minute break before closing statements.
Plaintiff is ready for closing, Your Honor.
Is defense here?
Yes, defense is ready as well.
Okay, plaintiff, you may close.
May it please the court. Members of the jury, you learned about the victim, Genesis Petrillo, today. You learned about how Genesis and Casey fell in love and how excited they were to be a family and begin their life. But folks, you also heard about how Genesis and the defendant never got along. And that right when the defendant found out that her child was engaged to Genesis and that Genesis wanted to move her child out of Midlands, well, the defendant knew exactly what she had to do. He needed to solve this problem. He needed to get rid of Genesis. Now, at the beginning of trial, we told you to follow the pesticide. Follow the pesticide from the defendant to the bottle to the victim. So let's follow that pesticide. Now, we heard about how the day started from Sam Arnold, the wedding caterer. And he came in early that morning to make sure that everything looked perfect for their wedding day. But members of the jury, you were here as the wedding caterer told us that every single day, when he showed up to work with everyone in charge of the wedding, that the defendant and Genesis were continually fighting. But members of the jury, that's not all you heard. He saw the defendant carrying a bottle of pesticide right into the kitchen where that bottle of Carowine was. Folks, that's not just an in-law trying to mend a relationship. That's someone who has conjured up a plan to get rid of her problem. To get rid of her problem by putting pesticide into that bottle of wine. Now, after the defendant puts the pesticide into that bottle of wine, she goes to make a toast. Now, the defendant tells the victim, "This is only for you, no one else." Now, Genesis, the victim, not knowing what was in store for her, she thought it was she thought it was the defendant trying to mend their relationship. Now, Genesis didn't realize that when she drank that bottle of wine, that it wasn't just them mending her relationship, but instead, it was going to be a death sentence. Angel Rodriguez, the victim's best friend, testifies how Genesis was with her all night long and how she went from the giddy, excited bride to falling into a coma and passing away. Angel Rodriguez actually becomes so concerned for her best friend that she decides she has to call 911. And as she calls 911, she becomes frantic and she realizes that she needs to find Casey. She needs to tell Genesis's fiance what's going on. But before Angel Rodriguez can find Casey Soto, well, Angel Rodriguez runs into the defendant. And the defendant says, "Well, I guess there won't be a wedding." Now, members of the jury, no one had even told the defendant that Genesis Petrillo was the one who was in the hospital. The defendant already knew. The defendant knew what was happening. Now, just a few miles away, Genesis Petrillo is fighting for her life. She's fighting for her life as Dr. Kwan, the victim's physician, works rapidly to try and diagnose what is wrong with her. At first, Dr. Kwan thinks that maybe it is alcohol poisoning. But upon further examination, upon further test analysis, he realizes that that's out of the question, that what this is pesticide poisoning. Now, Dr. Kwan runs numerous tests and finally realizes that he has to do something. He has to administer the antidote to try and save Genesis Petrillo. But the antidote doesn't work. Genesis Petrillo dies at 9:27 a.m. Now, at 9:27 a.m., Genesis Petrillo should have been waking up, getting ready to start her life with Casey. Genesis Petrillo should have been putting on her wedding dress and sharing a good time with people that she loved and cared about. But instead, members of the jury, at 9:27 a.m., Genesis Petrillo was dead. Genesis Petrillo was dead because of because of organophosphates that had been put into the alcohol that she consumed that night in that bottle of Cara wine from the defendant, Harper Martini. Now, members of the jury, I found it really interesting in today's trial that opposing counsel decided to bring up this exhibit. So let's look at this exhibit. Now, whenever I was talking to Dr. Cannon, you heard that Dr. Cannon specified that Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content was 0.16%. Well, folks, if we look at this graph that opposing counsel so greatly brought for us and we go to 0.16% and we go through that list of possible outcomes, I don't see death as one of them, folks. And that's not just because it was left out. Well, that's because it's impossible. Genesis Petrillo couldn't have died from blood alcohol poisoning. It's not possible. They gave us the graph to prove that. Now, folks, in today's trial, we brought a claim of battery against the defendant, Harper Martini. So that means that we had to prove three things to you. We had to prove that the defendant mixed pesticide into a single bottle of Cara wine. And we did that through the wedding caterer who showed you that he saw the defendant with a bottle of pesticide heading straight into the kitchen where that wine was. Now, we had to prove to you that the defendant did so with the intent to harm the victim. Well, we did that as well. You heard Harper Martini, the defendant himself, say to you, yeah, I did write that note where I said I was going to get rid of the problem. And lastly, we had to prove that the poisoned wine caused harm to Genesis Petrillo. And we did that. Now, our job today as the plaintiff was to prove that by a preponderance of the evidence that Harper Martini committed battery, that more likely than not, with the facts presented today, that Harper Martini is liable for the death of Genesis Petrillo. Now, members of the jury, we did that. Look at the facts, members of the jury. Look at the chart that opposing counsel gave us. Thank you.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, may it please the court. All it takes is one too many. One too many drinks. You've heard a lot throughout the course of today's trial, but before I get into that, I would like to actually remind you about who Harper is. Because Harper is a loving father. Harper is someone who cared so very deeply for his daughter. Harper is someone who loved his business and would never do anything to jeopardize its reputation. Now, it's no secret that Mr. Martini and Genesis Petrillo didn't see eye to eye. But ladies and gentlemen, it's not uncommon for in-laws to not have a great relationship with each other. If I'm being honest, I don't always get along with my in-laws. Now, Mr. Petrillo even told you he didn't feel that anyone was good enough for his baby girl. Mr. Martini only wanted the best for Casey. Now, the plaintiff wants you to believe that we are here today because Mr. Martini intended to poison Ms. Petrillo. But they had to prove this to you. They had to show you their case was true to a preponderance of the evidence. Now, you can think of this almost like a scale. If at any point in today's case that scale tipped away from the plaintiff's favor, then they have not met their burden. And they have not met their burden today. You see, to show battery in the state of Midlands, they actually had to prove three key elements today. First, they had to show you that there was an act by Mr. Martini. Next, they had to show you that that he intended to cause harm. Finally, they had to show that harm was done. Now, nowhere in today's case did you ever hear any testimony, any evidence that Mr. Martini actually did something to harm Ms. Petrillo. So no, they did not prove that. And if they couldn't prove that first element in today's case, there is no way that they could have proved the other two elements in today's case. Because if no act was ever done, he couldn't have intended to harm her, and no harm and harm could not have befell Miss Petrillo because of Mr. Martini. With that, ladies and gentlemen, they have not met their burden. It's clear that at this point, you are required by law to find Mr. Martini not liable. It's important to note that today, the defense has no burden. We didn't have to prove anything to you. So after the plaintiff rested their case in chief, I could have sat down along with my co-counsel and we could have stopped right there because you would have already been required to find Mr. Martini not liable. But we didn't stop there. We still provided you with evidence of other possibilities. You see, today you heard from Mr. Martini himself, Mr. Osborne, and Dr. Cannon. Now, Mr. Martini told you that he loved Casey with all his heart and he would never do anything to harm her. Mr. Martini even made it clear to you that had he poisoned this bottle, how was he to have known that his daughter wouldn't have drank from that same bottle? There's no way he could have known that. Why would he risk his daughter's life, the daughter whom he loved so very much? Now, Mr. Martini also told you it's not strange for there to be some level of contaminants in wine. You see, Peony Estates is not an organic winery. Peony Estates does use chemical pesticides, and what this means is that there is an acceptable level of contaminants found in this wine. Contaminants like the one that were found in Miss Petrillo's system. Next, you heard from Mr. Osborne. Mr. Osborne told you that he's worked with Mr. Martini and Peony Estates for over 4 years, 80 plus events. He knew them to have a good reputation, and he doesn't believe that Mr. Martini is capable of poisoning anyone. He also told you about how he noticed that Miss Petrillo was actually drinking quite a bit the night of June 7th. At the very least, he thought that she would be hungover. In fact, you also heard testimony from the plaintiff's witness today, Miss Rodriguez. Miss Rodriguez told you it wasn't uncommon for them to be drinking pretty heavily, that they drank quite a bit. That was not uncommon for Miss Petrillo. Now, this is particularly important because as you heard from Dr. Cannon, alcohol poisoning is actually a possibility in today's case because there's no way for them to pinpoint the peak BAC that Miss Petrillo had that night. In fact, she told you how there were large, how Miss Petrillo's stomach contents was almost entirely wine, and that the symptoms that she felt actually fell into the severe and life-threatening portions of that BAC chart she showed you. As you'll see here, a good amount of those symptoms fall in these ranges. Now, the plaintiff talked about how death might not be a possibility, but doesn't life and threatening impairment imply that it's a threat to one's life and can cause death? Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence here is clear. The plaintiff has not met their burden. There's only one just verdict in today's case. Find Mr. Martini not liable. Thank you.
Rebuttal, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Members of the jury, follow the facts. Both doctors told you that alcohol poisoning isn't possible anymore. Members of the jury, when you return back to that jury deliberation room, please remember to follow the pesticide. Follow the pesticide from the defendant to the bottle to the victim. Thank you.
Okay, I think that concludes the case. The scoring judges were supposed to be scoring while they were doing it. Have both the scoring judges finished scoring?
Yeah, I have.
Yes, I have.
Okay. I guess we're also supposed to give comments. I believe that we're limited to about 3 minutes apiece on our comments. So I'm just going to proceed really quickly. I'm not a scoring judge. I'm just going to put that out there for the participants to know that I was not scoring the case. Have a couple critiques. The first one is on cross-examination, limit the use of the word correct at the end of cross-examination questions. It's not something that you have to completely avoid altogether, but if you use the word correct at the end of your statement over and over again, it gets distracting.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I think we need to, have we ensured that the ballots have been submitted?
That's what I was just, I believe they both said that they had been.
Sorry, we're supposed to get confirmation that they have been submitted, that there are no issues before we can move into comments.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies, Your Honor.
Nope, that's fine. Have the ballots been submitted?
Mine has, yeah.
Mine, I'm pressing submit and I'm still figuring it out. Sorry, just a second.
I think you have to type the word submit into the little box.
Okay, of course you do. Fantastic. I'll do that right now. Okay, mine is submitted.
Okay. I assume we can proceed now?
We should be good, Your Honor.
Okay. So limit the use of the word correct. The way that you give a cross-examination question, you're just stating it as a statement, and it's implied that they should agree with you. You can use it if the defendant, or sorry, if the witness is being combative. That's an area where you can use correct, as if they're not sure that you're asking them a question, but that doesn't happen very often. With regards to rulings by the court or by the bench, they're not always going to be what you expect. The judges aren't perfect. Sometimes they make wrong rulings, and you just have to truck on. I noticed that nobody did redirect. Was that something that you were told to avoid, or was that a choice? Anybody can answer that.
I think it's likely a timing issue.
Yeah, I think it's both a timing issue and just a general choice among programs.
Okay, there were a couple instances where I thought a redirect would be appropriate. For instance, the Blair Osborne questioning, you tried to go into showing that he wasn't biased, and I sustained an objection. Then on cross-examination, they tried to show that he was, so that would open the door. Sorry, let me turn my phone off. So there were a few instances where I thought redirect would actually be really good, but if you were running low on time, then I don't know why that is supposed to be on silent. Yeah, so just obviously you have time issues, but if it's important to redirect, sometimes just keep them short. If your witness got impeached on something and you can show that that impeachment was not necessarily valid, say for instance they're impeached with bias, and they weren't, and you can show that they weren't biased, you should go ahead and do that. And that's all of my comments. If one of the other judges wants to proceed.
I can go ahead and get some comments. My name's Luke, by the way. Y'all haven't seen me at all this entire round until right now, so I've been kind of in the back. I'll just give some good overhead stuff. I know it's late, everybody wants to go to bed or do homework or whatever you want to do. Overall, I thought it was good, considering the virtual environment for a round. I did mock in undergrad, so I'm used to actually being in a courtroom and having to deal with a lot of that. So it was great to see how y'all kind of transition over to virtual. I thought there was a lot of good eye contact, a lot of good intentional pauses in speaking. It didn't feel like everybody was rushing through it, and it was just quick to get through everything. Some criticisms I had, I think there were a lot of missed objections, specifically in the realm of hearsay or 702, 701 kind of stuff. I think there were a lot of times we objected to character evidence when it could have been a different one that would have been a lot better argument. And then obviously, you know, relevance objections or irrelevance objections. I think one of the defense attorneys finally mentioned that the bar was really low. I wanted that to be kind of the first thing that comes out of anybody's mouth. If you're defending a relevance objection, you know, you should always remind the judge that's, you know, it's incredibly low, you know, Your Honor. There's no jurisdiction that recognizes a higher bar than that. But other than that, really good work. I liked all the statements. I thought the openers told a good story, which was great. I got a good grasp of everybody's themes, and I thought the closers did a good job of kind of taking everything that opposing counsel did and trying to say why it was wrong. Plaintiff, I really liked the use of the exhibit that they had done. I thought that was nice. And then defense closer, I like that you came back up and used the same exhibit and said, no, actually, I'm correct. So that was great to kind of see actual call and response. So that's everything that I have for y'all. But other than that, great job. Good luck in the rest of the competition. So.
I agree with what both of you guys said, and actually that pretty much covered everything I wrote down, like focusing on the burden of proof. And the only other thing I would say is just like there are sometimes when something that was obviously very well rehearsed and like very well said maybe needed to be adjusted in light of what someone else had kind of just finished saying, to where if I were a juror, I would be a little bit confused on how what the plaintiffs and the defendants were saying could possibly like both be true, just because they seem kind of like conclusory in a way. But I think that that's kind of hard because you have to kind of think on the spot about it. But I'm really impressed with how everyone spoke. I know that I definitely like, even now, I just have a tendency to talk super fast, and that's a big problem I know a lot of people have. And honestly, I didn't feel that way once this whole time. Everyone was very articulate and it was very impressive. But that's all I have.
Okay, is there anything else we need to do before we end the Zoom session?
I think that's it. I got a text from Elliot saying that we were good. They've got
Okay.
the ballots, so.
Okay, I am ending the session in that case.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.